You know, it's very popular in this town to say we should arm the Ukrainians. We should arm the Ukrainians. They're fighting the Russians. We don't like the Russians, so while they're killing the Russians, that's good for us. So arm the Ukrainians. And listen, I'm not saying we shouldn't arm the Ukrainians, but I think people think that when you're arming the Ukrainians, it means you're just sort of handing out rifles and grenades and they're going to it. No, arming the Ukrainians now means high-tech weaponry. And, well, it's weaponry that the Ukrainians really don't know how to use without some training. Without American training from American soldiers, without actually flying Ukrainian soldiers here to America, to Oklahoma, to train them how to use some of the missile systems we're giving them. And that's exactly what's happening right now. It was announced yesterday by the Pentagon. Is that a good idea? Will Russia see this as an escalation? Will Russia see this as proof that America is actually fighting this and using the Ukrainian army as our proxy? Joining us right now is Tony Shaffer. He's going to sort this out for us, military observer for us, an analyst, and certainly a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, CIA-trained intelligence officer. Tony, am I overstating it? And you know, I trust you. You're my friend. You'll tell me if I'm overstating it. But no. and I don't think it's a bad thing to arm them. But how do the Russians not see this as us really getting involved in this fighting if we're actually personally training them in Oklahoma?
Any action we take, Larry, needs to be tied to a strategic national objective. So to your point, yeah, I think under the Trump White House as well, there was an interest in maintaining an ability to leverage our tactical capabilities. That is to say, in this case, arming the Ukrainians, giving them lethal aid, which, by the way, Obama would not do. So Trump changed that policy, I think correctly, and he armed the Ukrainians. But there's a bright line to not cross, which is basically becoming a direct adversary without ability to influence the Russians, which I would argue that's where we're at. And let me tell you why I think that. You've illustrated the fact that we are now engaging in training Ukrainian troops, bringing them back. We did the same thing during the Cold War. Look, Larry, I remember being at Fort Bragg as a very young second lieutenant and being stuck in the barracks out in the middle of nowhere and seeing Nicaraguan troops showing up for clandestine training there at Fort Bragg. So, you know, we've taken sides. And I think it's not in our interest to take such a direct position as supporting the Ukrainians like we've done other nations, because then we become, as you said, a proxy enemy of the Russians. I don't think we should be in that position. I think we should help those defend themselves against authoritarianism, but at the same time, I don't think if we become a combatant, we lose the ability to be the ones who actually will try to seek a peaceful solution. And I think that's what we've lost here. Right now, we're in a position of training up a lot of the Ukrainians to use high-tech weapon systems, which they are not able to use. The Patriot missile system, it's at the crux of what they're doing to now introduce it. It's expensive. It's going to take 3 months to train up just the basic first crews. And I would argue, Larry, the moment we introduce this into the theater of war, they're going to burn through all these. You're going to fire 2 missiles per sortie. You're going to burn through all the ammunition in 2 weeks. And then what are you going to do? And then what are we going to do? Because we then deplete our own high-tech, sophisticated weapon capabilities that we no longer have the ability to use if we have to go to war. So I think there's a lot of downsides here that people aren't properly thinking through, which will not only disadvantage our ability to be the adult in the room and try to seek peaceful resolution. If we are actually tasked to do something, we may not have the weapon systems available to actually do something we have to do.
Yeah, by the way, we're not seeking peace. We've already said, anytime somebody rears that, anytime somebody says, maybe it's time to sit down and talk about
it. It's insane.
Oh, you're giving Putin exactly what he wants. You're on Putin's side.
No,
by the way, it should also be noted when you observed those, the Contra rebels in Nicaragua being trained here, I believe Democrats at that time were on the side of the Sandinistas, the Soviet-backed rebels. Probably Joe Biden was too, if I remember right. That's ironic.
Probably. Yeah.
Also, I was told that this administration, they're masters at international diplomacy and international foreign relations. Isn't there another country out there that knows how to use these Patriot missile systems? God knows we sell them to a ton of other nations. Wouldn't it be easier and more efficient and frankly keep our hands out of it if one of these other countries stepped up and did this training? Why the only answer I can think of as to why we would do this and make a show is to let the Russians know, you bet we're on their side and you bet we're engaging in this. Otherwise,
we ought to have a separate debate, Larry, on what they're masters of. But with that said, we need to examine exactly what you said. So there's a great book out. I encourage people to George Cry did a book called Charlie Wilson's War.
Oh yeah,
and it had to do with.
I saw the movie. I don't read books. I'm on.
Well,
television,
Tom Hanks is a cheap copy of the actual representative who did it, Charlie Wilson, and that's what we did. We actually went to the Israelis, went to the Saudis, went to the Pakistanis, and actually did things to destabilize Russia. There's, the Soviet Union, and it worked very well. It actually destabilized the Russians and forced them into a position where that, amongst other things, the Chernobyl, there's a number of events, Star Wars, these things all quietly crashed the Soviet Union.
But we were able to use our allies to do a lot of this stuff. You would think that, there are tons of countries in Western Europe that also have these missile systems. They know how to work it. It's a shorter commute for the Ukrainians to go there, but there's a reason why we wanted everyone to know, and especially let Putin know, that they were getting this training in Oklahoma. Listen, Tony, before I let you go, I saw this story in Afghanistan. You were one of the first boots on the ground, literal boots on the ground in Afghanistan after September 11th. We liberated that nation. We freed those people. Of course, it's back in the hands of the Taliban now. And we've got this new story now that female athletes are now forbidden from participating in international sports. They had been a representative and icon of real change in that country. And now, for fear for their lives, these Afghanistan women are now, they've been moved out of universities, they've been moved out of getting a formal education, they can't compete in sports. What is our Afghan policy at this point? And especially considering the treasure, the blood, the effort that you and your comrades at the time, your fellow soldiers, spent over there in freeing those people. This is maddening.
It is. So I was actually speaking with a colleague about this morning because certain three-letter agencies are contemplating jumping back in to do covert actions. And when I was asked to comment on it, it's like, and then what? What do we do? It's like, yeah, we can do all these sophisticated operations, but then what's the policy? Tony Zinni, General Zinni, the commander of CENTCOM, once told me a story how he got called into President Clinton back in the 90s, and Clinton asked him, hey, Tony, General Zinni, can you do X? Yeah. But then what? What are you going to do? And to your point, there's no policy right now that we would tie tactical strategic capabilities to. So first off, Larry, they don't want to define a policy because they are embarrassed about the pullout. The last thing you want to do as the current administration is draw attention to the fact that you created the very chaos you're now trying to comment on.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate the people of Afghanistan, like the women of Afghanistan, are paying the price of the Biden failures, but that's something that needs to be resolved before we take any action. What is our policy? I recommend nothing until we figure out what we're supposed to achieve regarding our national objectives. And this is the wrong crew to do that, since they essentially are the high school debating team in charge right now.
I'm sure you saw Congressman Michael Waltz of Florida, former Army Ranger.
I know Mike, he's a great guy.
Whole group of vets there in Congress. Now they want armed services to go after this Afghanistan story to find out exactly what went wrong and who covered up.
They should.
I hope they call you and get your advice on what threads to pull. If you were advising them, where should they start looking? What rocks do they need to overturn?
Well, the first one is essentially the breaking of the promise with the Taliban. The moment, Larry, the Biden administration broke the agreement with the Taliban regarding dates and essentially forcing this commingling of the Taliban and the Afghan government to come for a coalition government. The moment they broke that agreement, everything was done. And then you need to figure out, why did we do that? Why did the Obama, I keep saying it, sorry, the Biden administration break that basic agreement? Yeah. And then that one act resulted in all the chaos that came after. So go back to that original act and then find out. All those tactical decisions, Mark Milley screwing it up, giving up Bagram, those all are just noise after the failure of the policy, which should also be exposed as well.
And let's remind everyone, still, no one has gotten fired from the Pentagon or from the Biden administration for this disaster of our U.S. policies in Afghanistan after all those decades. Tony Shaffer, thank you. Thank you for your service in Afghanistan, of course, and thank you for your service tonight on this program. More to come. It's Salem News Channel. You're watching O'Connor Tonight.